people. By force of arms, if necessary. We may have learnt almost nothing.
One lesson that we could learn would be the need for democratic governments responsible to the people to take firm measures against those who deny majority rule and believe that they, however small a minority might be, might represent the Irish people. Democracy is imperfect, as we all know. It was in 1922, it is now at the end of the 90s, but it's better than militaristic alternatives.
I think the real legacy from the Civil War is a model of Irish history. A model of Irish history which involves a legend of the stab in the back, to use a German phrase, that he who compromises is a traitor, and that all negotiation involves a sellout. And we must not repeat the great mistake of 1921. Northern IRA, Provo history begins with the great sellout, as they see it, of 1921. And that sellout must not be repeated. And he who negotiates is immediately under suspicion, automatically. And this has dogged the provisional IRA for the last 25 years. Anyone who's been set up to negotiate has had to retreat back into the fold, shouting orthodoxies of various kinds to prove that he is as hard against the British and in favour of the freedom struggle as everybody else. And it's only in the last 5 years or so that that mentality has begun to break down in the face of a very hard, cruel set of facts, that their war is unwinnable.
We are the party that puts people before politics, the party of all the people. We are Fianna Fáil.
The outstanding legacy of the Civil War for Ireland's political system is the two-party framework which emerged from the conflict. Two large blocs, two substantial political machines, today separated more by history than by policy, still owing their existence to the split in Sinn Féin of 75 years ago.
I ask the Republican movement, don't procrastinate any longer. Make up your minds. Politics is the way you solve problems. You'll never solve division through violence.
Desmond Fitzgerald served in Ireland's first government. His son reflects on the political legacy of the Civil War.
We can't be grateful for something which was so terrible in its impact on that society and that generation, and which has had abiding consequences in terms of continuing violence in the island, probably. The fact there was a civil war has certainly contributed to the continued existence of an IRA in some form. So you can't be grateful for that. But on the other hand, once it happened and two large blocs emerged, those blocs have protected us from the ravages of ideology which did such damage in Europe in the 30s, and which were still in Britain in the 80s, you know, because of the ideological position of Margaret Thatcher and the Conservatives, still capable of doing damage. We haven't had those disadvantages here, so there are, you know, some positive consequences as well as the appalling negative consequences at the time.
On the North, Fianna Fáil are better on the North, are better on the whole concept of Ireland and the unity that we would aspire to have in a democratic and constitutional way, as distinct from Fine Gael, who appear to be to us to be sort of a two-nation party. And that, I think, would be the basic difference between the two parties, and that, as I say, would be, as you would describe it, the legacy of the Civil War and the War of Independence, less so. But I would like to see a reconciliation of the post-Civil War political parties coming together, and I think if that happens, I think that the unity of our country is nearer in historical terms and further.
My tradition would not be to go in with Fianna Fáil. I don't begrudge them anything, and if they keep going for 5 years and make a success of the country, so best for everybody. I don't quite trust them. I never will, that's my tradition, that's the way I was brought up. But if they make the law, I'll keep the law, whether I like it or not.
Bridget Hogan O'Higgins's suspicion of what she would see as her traditional political enemy is perhaps not so surprising. Her father, Patrick Hogan, was a member of the Cabinet, which prosecuted the Civil War on behalf of the Free State. She witnessed at first hand the residue of bitterness which the fighting left behind.
When I was first elected in '57, I was quite shocked at the level of bitterness in the Dáil. But in hindsight, I can now understand it. You still had De Valera in the Dáil, Lamass, Dan Breen, Oscar Traynor, all of these on the Fianna Fáil side. On our side, you had John Costello, Sean McKeown, Dick Mulcahy, and a number of Civil War people, you see. And the bitterness was quite incredible. To me, this wasn't used to bitterness.
A legacy of hatred and suspicion, countless deaths, an enormous financial cost for the newborn Free State. A model of Irish history sanctioning the taking of arms against majority rule. It's difficult now to draw any credit as a nation from the history of Ireland's civil war. But it may be even more foolish to try to ignore it.
Trying to, I think, ascribe motives either to De Valera or to the Cosgrave-ites is really something of an obscenity. De Valera was wrong in what he did. They were wrong in some of what they did. But if any of us were faced with the same situation today, what would we do?
I have no regrets for anything I ever done. No whatsoever. I do. If it had to be done again, I'd do it.
All the older people regret anything that ever happened during that Civil War. And I hope that the younger generation, I never want to see one of them join in that. Let them say, for God's sake, pray for God to help them make a good decision over the table rather than war.
When Liam Lynch fell here high up in the Knockmeal Down Mountains in April 1923, the Civil War was as good as over. Its legacy, however, took decades to overcome. Perhaps Mary Robinson was right in 1990, when she applauded Ireland for finally stepping out from behind the faded flags of the Civil War. But if we as a nation have indeed put the events of 75 years ago behind us, then perhaps this black and bitter period of Ireland's recent past still offers lessons that are best remembered and not forgotten.
And next Wednesday at 9:30, you can see Kavanagh QC.